Hey guys, welcome back. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the Terminator X Max wiring harness and ECU install in the car. I'm going to go briefly over a little bit of the prep work. I'm not going to do a full. I didn't record me actually installing the wire harness, unfortunately. But I'm going to talk about the overview of the install and how it goes. And then I'll also do a lot about how I tuned the ECU and got it on its first start without using that 3.5-inch handheld. So first things first, I needed to find which Terminator X Max to actually order for the car. So just go to Holly's website, EFI fuel injection. It's right up here, Terminator X. And then they give different types of kits for what they sell. The one I used is Terminator X Max, X and X Max LS kits. And then here you have three options: X Max kits, and then you have without the 3.5-inch handheld. So obviously it's cheaper if you go without the 3.5-inch handheld, which is the route that I wanted to go. So I don't want the 3.5-inch handheld, and I just wanted to tune it myself. So there's a lot of different kits here, and they make it nice and easy. So you can just click this little arrow here, Terminator LS options. I want fuel, I want spark, I have drive-by-wire, and I want transmission control. So this is the one I want to select, and it kind of narrows down a lot of it for you. So here are your only options that offer these exact things. So you do need to know a little bit about your engine. I have a stock 2007 Corvette LS2. The main things that you need to know is that it's a 58X reluctor wheel, and you need to know that it's a EV6, I believe, injectors. Yeah, so EV6 here, fuel injectors, 34 pounds per hour at 50 psi. So when you know that information, anything with a 24X is not for mine. So here we have a 58X 4X cam, EV6 injectors. I do not have EV1, so this is the only one. So this is part number, I think it's got it set here somewhere. Yep, part number 5509280. And the T on the end, I believe, includes transmission control. So that's just another tidbit for you. All right, so going into the prep work of installing the Terminator X Max harness, I first needed to get where my hole is going to be through the firewall. So I had original AC in this car, and it had a stock, this is from the factory, it had a 1.5-inch hole right in the firewall to get some wiring for the exterior wiring on the AC unit there. I think maybe a blower motor and a couple other things was some wiring. So I already have this giant 1.5-inch hole in my firewall. So I decided to use that existing hole and kind of work with that. I realize it's right, it's one of the very obvious things at the back of the firewall, and I don't really care about so much as beauty, is more a function. So it was easy for me to access and get it through. So this kind of shows the wiring that's through the hole there. So what did I end up doing? This was the 1.5-inch hole. I ended up adding an additional 1.25-inch hole right next to that hole, and then this allowed me plenty of room to fish through the harness. And what I plan to do to fill up this space is just order one of these aluminum pass-through brackets. So, I'll have a larger hole and a smaller hole here, which is absolutely perfect for exactly what I've got right here. The next thing I want to talk about is where I placed the computer, the ECU, inside the actual car. So the next photo here, here we can see, this is my glove box. Sorry. This is my glove box right here inside the car. So what I ended up doing was the glove box is not tall enough to have the Terminator X Max stand up vertically and be mounted to the back of it. So what I did is I cut a hole at the top of my glove box toward the rear of it, and I was able to mount the Terminator X Max just with some tap screws right to the back of my glove box. And with it mounted vertically, I was able to route all the plugs in, click, 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 click. So yeah, that went pretty smoothly, and then I was able to fish them out my the hole there, and I thought everything worked really well. What I will say is on the Terminator, let me zoom in here. So there's a couple things I want to point out. I'm going to show you what all these coming out my firewall. So this is the main engine harness here that's coming out, this giant bulky one. And this one here that comes straight down, that's the transmission harness, and that goes back to the 4L65E. And then this wire that comes out is there's a separate harness just to run the drive-by-wire throttle body. So what I do want to say is about the MAP sensor, the oil pressure sensor, which is at the back of the intake, back by the firewall there. And then there's a factory MAF, a MAF, slot style MAF sensor. So my engine did come with a slot style MAF sensor. Terminator X Max does not connect to the MAF sensor at all. You have to order a LS style MAT sensor, air temperature. So just for your intake, it's an absolute air temperature sensor. It's very stock, normal, and that's what you need for your intake. You'll take out that MAF sensor because you won't need it. Now, the MAP sensor, MAP, luckily the kit that I bought fit perfectly with my MAP sensor. So what I've seen online is not all Terminator X or X Max kits fit your stock MAP sensors that you have on the intake, which is no problem. If it doesn't fit, there is a port on the actual ECU. This little blue line right here, you have an internal 1-bar MAP sensor built into the computer. So if you don't have a MAP sensor, yours doesn't fit, you don't have to use it. You can just program to use the 1-bar internal sensor right here. And then you'll have to run a vacuum line to your intake. So that's no big deal. Also the oil pressure sensor. What I found out is, I guess on some LS engines in like Camaros or don't all have the same oil pressure sensors. So you'll need to, if it doesn't fit, Holly recommends do not cut anything from the harness and add on a different plug. Just buy an oil pressure sensor and pull the old one out, put a new one in. So those are the only 3 things that I potentially was going to need to change on my engine. Luckily, my oil pressure sensor matched, my MAP sensor matched my stock, and then the only thing I had to change, which I knew I had to change, was the slot style MAF sensor, and just put in a MAT sensor. So that's the only things I needed to do there. I did wire the Terminator X Max into the stock 69 Camaro wiring harness. So what I do want to show you here real quick is the Terminator X Max instructions. So what I want to talk about is the loose wires that you have to do, because everything is plug and play in this thing. I didn't want to show a video of all the plugs that I did, because honestly it took me maybe 10 minutes to plug all those connections in, and it was very, very, very straightforward, very simple, very easy. What I want to talk about is on page 13, loose wires right here. So the loose wiring, these are the wires you have to essentially add into your existing harness. So you're going to need a switched 12 volt red and white wire, and it needs to be to an ignition source. So here's the stock 69 Camaro wiring harness, and what I want to show you is my ignition switch. I'm not going to trace all these lines out, but basically what I'll tell you is all these pink lines that converge into a point, they all come from the ignition switch, which ties right back to the battery. So I have a lot of indicators. I have a brake warning indicator, I have a generator indicator, a temperature indicator, and an oil pressure indicator, all which have their own separate ignitions sources that go back to the ignition switch. So the Terminator X, my computer will handle oil pressure, so I don't need my oil pressure indicator anymore. I don't need my temperature indicator anymore. I don't need my generator indicator, and I don't need my brake warning light. All of these indicators and got eliminated. So that's at least 4 ignition sources that I can grab from. So what I'll show you here in the photos, this is what my stock setup looked like. So right here, I pulled off the old gauge cluster. Here you see all the indicators right here. So this was, I believe, the brake indicator, brake warning indicator. And then on the other side here is where you have your generator indicator, your temperature, and then your oil pressure. None of these indicators I will need. So I have these pink wires are all you can use for these. If you're installing it into a 69 Camaro, you can use all of these for the Terminator X Max, or just one, and then wrap up the others. So anyway, that's your ignition source. 12-volt battery, that's straightforward. That one goes straight to the battery. You have a 12-volt fuel pump green wire. So this one can only go directly to your fuel pump if your fuel pump requires less than 15 amps. So luckily I have a Walboro 255 liter per hour pump, and I think the maximum amperage that it draws at like 100 psi is like 12 amps. So I'm under the 15 amp requirement. I can use this wire to run directly into my fuel pump, which I did. If you're using a high, fuel pump with lots and lots of pressure, you're going to need to probably run a separate relay and use this green wire as a trigger. And they state that in the instructions. The black wire, chassis ground, very straightforward, very simple. And then the other wire is your blue and white striped, is your TAC output. So I'm running Dakota Digitals. If I didn't need to use this wire to go to my Dakota Digitals because I used a BIM connector. And the BIM connector allowed me to take all of the Holley ECU data that it's reading currently from the engine and display it on my Dakota Digital gauges. So I didn't have to install a whole new set of sensors to run the Dakota Digitals. I didn't have to do anything than that. All I needed was a BIM connector. It ties right into the Terminator X harness and connects right to, and then you have to program the Dakota Digitals. So that's all for the Terminator X engine harness. Now I'm running the X Max, so I have a transmission harness as well. So there are 4 loose wires on the transmission harness. You have, again, a black and a red for ground and for straight to the battery. And then you have another red and white ignition source, which I have, again, if you remember from the photos, I have tons of ignition sources, from the brake to the generator. I already grabbed one of them and tied it all in. And then you have a gray wire. The gray wire goes to your brake light switch, and this is to unlock your torque converter. So you do have to tie these in. Just make sure if you have a transmission control that you make sure to get these two. So that's how I wired it. And now I want to talk about the tune. So the Terminator X software that I used at the time was the 2nd version. There is a new version of the Terminator X Max software. I think it's version 3, but I'm just going to show you on version 2 because that's what I used. You're going to open a global file. They have already a folder called Base Calcs. So you click on that. You click OK. So we're GM. We are LS based. And alright, so this is my tune. You can already see it. It's at the top of the list. I've already made this tune, but it gives you all these it gives you basically an area to start from. So where I started from was 58X reluctor wheel. I want multi-port fuel injection. I want LS, and this one has a transmission, which is the 4L80. So I'm running a 4L60 or 65. and you can easily change that. So this is the tune that I started with, just just to get me going. So it pops up like this. What you're going to want to do is go through these items up here and just make sure the information's correct. So the first place that I would start is your system ICF. So you have an ECU config, Terminator X Max. Perfect. That's what I want. Engine parameters, number of cylinders. I have 8 cylinders. Engine displacement 6 liters. VE base, fuels, gasoline. That's all pretty standard. You shouldn't have to change much in here at all. Multi-port injection, fuel pump prime at 5 seconds, 60 psi pressure, perfect. Use only one option on the O2 sensor. So all this was good. You will need to look up what injectors you are running. I looked up my injectors and they're like a 34 per hour injector GM number. I couldn't find my exact number in this list, so I looked up all of these numbers and found one that matched mine. So this one down here, this 89017,586, it already typed it in. Look at that, 33.3 pounds per hour at 60 psi. So if you remember what I pulled up online about my engine, it's EV6 injectors, and where are they? Yeah, 34 pounds per hour, 58 psi, EV6 injectors. So this is how I use to get the engine started. I may need to change this injector info out later, but so far the engine turned over and ran great, so I'm going to leave it as is just for now. So the next is ignition parameters. I did change something in here. So the ignition type is perfect, 58 tooth on the reluctor wheel. I changed this to, for my knock sensors, I have a 2-wired knock sensor. And I believe I looked up, I had to Google this information, but I believe it was a 5.7 kilohertz resonance. And this is what I used. And again, the engine fired up and turned over just fine and ran great. So I'm probably going to keep that just as it is. But that information I had to look up. It took me a while to find that. And then I think the rest of this information, so let's run through it real quick. I didn't touch anything in this section. Your basic I/O, I only have one fan, so I didn't need a fan number 2. I don't have a secondary fuel pump, and I didn't want to have, nope, I don't have IAC kick, and I don't want to have my AC shut down at a certain any standard. So I turned all these off, and I only have my electric fan running. Torque converter, lockup. Enable torque converter clutch output. I don't think I touched anything in here either. Maybe I did. I think I enabled this. Yeah, I think I enabled the torque converter clutch output, but and then I didn't touch anything in staging. All right. Closed loop learned. Because I don't have my exhaust installed yet, I'm just running open headers. I did not want to have closed loop on. And then for learning, I didn't want it to learn anything because I know it's going to be running rich and I don't want it to learn anything. And you can edit these. You can go back in here and turn these, you can go back in here and enable the closed loop and enable the learning features. I just didn't want it learning running rich. So I wanted to turn that off just for the first startup. And then when I get some exhaust going, then I'll turn those back on. I didn't touch anything in variable cam timing. I didn't touch anything in individual cylinders for corrections. Perfect. So that was everything in system ICF that I adjusted. For sensors, we can run down the sensors list. So it automatically will set it at the internal 1-bar map sensor. So this, I believe, whatever tune you select from the base calcs, it'll automatically want you to use the Terminator internal 1-bar map sensor. So this guy. But my map sensor connection fit my stock, so I wanted to use my stock. So what you do here is just go down to GM LS map sensor. Click yes. I didn't find my exact part number, in this list, these GM pin numbers. I didn't find it, so I just clicked GMLS map sensor, and it seemed to run just fine. So I'm keeping that just as is. Coolant temperature sensor, again, GMLS, coolant temperature sensor, perfect. Mat sensors, so remember, this is the one that you have to install. You can't use your stock slot style MAF, which is like it has an internal temperature sensor in it, but it won't. The Terminator X doesn't have a plug for that, so you have to install a mat sensor. I left that as GMLS mat, perfect. Oil pressure, I do not have a Holley. I'm using the stock GMLS oil pressure, so that's the one I changed that to. And then fuel pressure, I didn't have a fuel pressure sensor. I'm gonna add one, but for right now, if you don't have it plugged in, it's not gonna do anything, so I left that as Holley 100 PSI. So there's all the sensors. Let's see, idle. I didn't change idle speed. I don't have an IAC control, so I didn't touch any of this stuff. So yeah, I didn't touch anything in there. Let's go to Spark. I'm just running through these items. I didn't touch anything in Spark. Nope, not a thing. I didn't touch anything in Spark. Here we go, transmission. Transmission setup. So, I do not have a 4L80E. I have a 4L60E. So you notice that there are two options on a 4L60E, and there's also an option for a 2009 plus 4L70E. Most 4L60s and 65Es have a 1.63 on a second gear. And mine is a pre-2009. So this is the one I selected. I'm not sure. I haven't seen many as a 1.75 second gear, but it's in there if you have one. But I know most 4L60s, 4L65s have a 1.63 for the second gear, so that's what I selected for mine. I'm not 100% sure what's in mine, but I know that the stock gear ratio's 1.63 is second, so I didn't mess with it. My engine turned over just fine, and my transmission works. So we're running with it until there's an issue. So speed calculation, again, I have the BIM module, which transfers all the data that my Terminator ECU is going to read over to my Dakota Digitals. So I do not need a speedometer output at all. I will automatically get that. I don't need to have a separate output for it, so I turn that off. And then I didn't touch anything in this table down below. Shift parameters, I did not touch anything in shift parameters. I didn't touch anything in line pressure. And then I have not adjusted the TCC lockup parameters at all. So whatever was put in here, yeah, I haven't touched it. So that is all these. And we have one more item, fuel. So base fuel, your fuel map here, graph, learn table. We turn learning off just to get the engine started and running. Your target air to fuel ratios, I have not adjusted this table at all, so this is how it came and this is how I started it. I think everything's the way it should be here. So the only thing we're missing though is, I believe we're missing drive-by-wire. So let me see real quick. Add an individual config. Drive-by-wire. Here we go. So yeah, we were missing that. There should be a default. Always select the default. Open that up. So here it is, the little pedal. I know we were missing it. So here's the pedal, drive-by-wire parameters. So this is a stock GM number. I did not change this number. I Googled what my stock 2007 LS2 throttle body was. This number did come up, so I left it. And when I performed the TPS auto set, everything ran perfectly. So that was pretty straightforward and easy. And when you're connected to the ECU, it'll automatically want you to run a TPS auto set. So don't worry about trying to figure out where it is up here in order to do that. Like once you connect to your ECU, you'll be able, it'll pop up the first thing. It'll ask you to do it. So it's not an issue. And then I believe it's this circular button right here. Once you're connected and you're synced with the ECU, that you give you options here, and you click this drop down, and you can do a TPS auto set at any time. So pedal versus throttle. So because I'm running a drive-by-wire and I don't have a IAC control idle air control, I needed to adjust this for my idle, because and what an IAC will do is there's a little valve on the top of it on your mechanical throttle body, and it'll essentially let air pass over the top of it, so that way you can run an idle. Well, if you have your drive-by-wire completely closed, it's going to stall out. You need to have it open some amount, so you need to adjust this graph. So what I do is 10%, and then what I did to level it out to 100, I think it was add 6, so 16, 22, 28. Sorry here while I do the math in my head and get this graph populated. I'm pretty sure it was by 6, so 52, 58, 64, 70. I messed up somewhere, didn't I? Yeah, I did. 76, 82. There we go. And then we want, there we go. So straight line. So that's what I did for my throttle body, the drive-by-wire throttle body. That way, so when your pedal position comes down to 0, your throttle is actually open 10%, and that's just for idle. Yeah, so that's all. And then this was pretty much it. So this is how I set up the tune. So when you connect to the ECU, this and this will be highlighted, and you can actually access this. So this helps you sync with the ECU, is what it's saying. And then it'll also give you certain options with the ECU, like you can download sync your tune with the ECU. The tune that you've basically set up here, you can sync it. If I was connected, I could see these gauges, and you could be reading maybe an air temp. You might be reading a map sensor, and then until the engine's running, you won't be reading any other data. But you should see your sensors, actually, some of them working, like the temperature and your map sensor. So a good way to test it just be to turn, cycle the ignition on, turn the Terminator X on, and then see if you're reading any of this data. And then this right here is for when you actually start the car. You always want to click this clipboard, and you'll do a data log, so you'll be able to read all your data. That's pretty much it. That's how I tune this car up. I did take a video of the first startup. I'll go ahead and put that up now for you guys to see. So enjoy.